13 Roads. Here is a tale I have not yet forgotten. Vess came back from the house that walks. Nobody in the village had planned for that. She came back 3 days later, carrying the fire she had been sent for. By the next morning, her stepmother and her 2 stepsisters were a soft grey ash on a cold floor. Vess was the only living person left in the house. She had eaten a good breakfast, and she was, the village always said this part carefully, with their eyes elsewhere, not at all unhappy. I'm going to tell you what Vess did at the house that walks, what she carried home with the fire, and why a borrowed flame ate the family that sent her for it. She had been sent down the crooked road to fetch fire, an errand everyone in the village understood for what it really was, a way of killing a child without the trouble of doing it yourself. The crooked road does not give back the people it takes. The house at the end of it belongs to a thing the village would not name indoors. They sent a child to knock on its door, and they agreed among themselves that this was nobody's fault. I knew Vess. I want to say that plainly at the start, because it is not usual for me. The people in these tales are mostly people I came too late for, or met once on a road and lost. Vess I knew for years after, so when I tell you what kind of child she was before the crooked road, I am not guessing. She was a quiet child, tidy. She kept her few things in a row, and she knew exactly how many there were. She did not cry where it could be seen. Her mother had died when Vess was 6, and her father had remarried inside the year, a capable widow from 2 villages over with 2 daughters of her own. And then her father had gone off to drive cattle on the salt road and had, in the manner of men on that road, not come back. So the house held 4 people, a stepmother and the stepmother's 2 daughters, and Vess. It was not a house with a monster in it. I want to be careful about that. The stepmother did not beat Vess. She was not a witch. She was not cruel in any way a magistrate would have a word for. She simply ran the house as a sum, and in the sum, Vess did not balance. There was food, and there were beds, and there was warmth, and these were divided 3 ways, and Vess was a 4th way, and the stepmother had decided, calmly, the way she decided everything, that the 4th way was an error in the books. You can starve a child like that without ever once raising your voice. Vess was starved like that for 5 years. She got very good in those 5 years at being small and quiet and owed nothing. Here is the household, in its own words, so you understand what Vess was sent away from. The 2 stepsisters were named Annette and Pell. They were older than Vess, and they were not wicked either exactly. They were only their mother's daughters, and they had learned the household sum the way children learn a song without ever being taught it. One evening, this was a week before the errand, the 3 girls were set to mending by the 1 lamp, and there was not quite enough light to go around, and Annette moved the lamp. I need it for the collars, Annette said. Yours is only a hem, Vess. A hem doesn't need seeing. Vess said nothing. She turned her work to the grey edge of the light and went on. And Pell, who was the younger sister and the one who liked to be agreed with, said, And anyway, she sees well in the dark. Don't you, Vess? You're like a little cat about it. She said it kindly. That is the part I want you to keep. Pell said it kindly, smiling, the way you'd compliment a girl on her hair. You're like a little cat, and went back to her collar in the good light, and never knew she had said anything at all. The stepmother was at the door of the room. She had heard it. She looked at Vess for a moment, at Vess sewing a hem she could not properly see, and what crossed the stepmother's face was not cruelty. It was something worse and more ordinary. It was calculation. She had been handed, just then, by her own daughter, a fact about Vess that might be useful, and she filed it, and she went to bed. A child who sees in the dark. A child the house could spare. The stepmother lay awake a while and did her sum, and by morning the errand had a shape. It needed an occasion, and the occasion was easy to arrange, because fire in that village was a shared and fragile thing, and everyone knew it. There were no matches on the crooked road's edge. A house kept its hearth alive year to year, banked at night, carried carefully. And if a hearth ever did go fully out, you went next door with an iron pan and borrowed a few coals back. The village was a single fire, in a sense, kept in 30 hearths, and the keeping of it was the first chore a child was trusted with. So it was no great trick for the stepmother, on a cold night with the others asleep, to let her own hearth die, to rake it out and damp it, and have, by morning, a cold black house and 3 shivering daughters, and a perfectly true thing to say, which was, "We have no fire." And then the second part, which she had also, lying awake, worked out. She would not send to a neighbor. She would say, and she said it at the cold hearth, to the 3 girls, in a voice with real worry in it, because she was not pretending, she had simply arranged for the worry to point where she needed it. "I won't beg coals up and down the lane like a pauper. We've a fire owed to us. Your father's grandmother kept the old house at the end of the crooked road, and there's a hearth there still, and it's ours by blood to draw from. One of you will go and fetch it." It was a lie with a true bone in it. There was a house at the end of the crooked road. There was a fire in it. It was not, in any sense the stepmother's blood could claim, theirs. But the lie did its work, which was to make a death sentence sound like an inheritance, and to make the sending of a child sound like the girl was simply the one whose turn it was. She did not choose Vess out loud. She was far too good a bookkeeper for that. She said the 3 girls would draw for it. She took 3 rushes from the floor and broke one short, and held all 3 in her fist with the ends level, and Annette drew, and Pell drew, and Vess drew the short one, and the stepmother said, "Well, there it is," as if the rushes had decided, and not her hand. Vess looked at the short rush in her fingers for a moment. Then she looked up, and she looked at her stepmother's face, and, this is the thing I knew Vess well enough after to be sure of, Vess understood the whole of it. The cold hearth, the drawing, the 5 years of the sum. She was 11, and she was not a fool, and she saw, standing in that black kitchen, exactly what she was holding, and exactly who had broken the rush, and exactly how little chance there was that she would ever stand in this kitchen again. And what Vess said, the only thing Vess said, was, "Can I take my mother's things?" Not a plea, not, "Please don't." A girl who has done the household sum as long as her stepmother has, does not waste breath asking to be kept. She asked for the one thing she meant to leave with. The stepmother, who could afford to be generous now, said yes. Vess's mother's things were 3. Vess knew there were 3, because Vess always knew how many there were of anything that was hers. There was a thimble, there was a comb with 2 teeth gone, and there was a small flat doll, no longer than a finger, sewn from a scrap of her mother's grey dress and stuffed with barley, with a face her mother had marked on it in 2 stitches for eyes and 1 for the mouth. Her mother had given Vess the doll the week she died. Vess had been 6, and her mother, who knew exactly what kind of house she was leaving her daughter in, who had married the capable widow's husband-to-be a different way round in her head and seen the sum coming. Her mother had told Vess, in the small, private voice of a woman with very little time left to hand her child everything she would need, "When you don't know what to do, give the doll a little to eat and tell it. It will help you. But Vess, listen. You must never let anyone see you do it, and you must never let anyone know you have it. A thing that helps you is only yours for as long as it's secret." Vess had been 6. She had believed it the way you believe your mother. She had carried the doll 5 years in the seam of her skirt, fed it crumbs in the dark, told it things, and been, she would not have used this word, but I will, been mothered by it, in a starved house, in a way nobody living had bothered to. She put the thimble and the comb and the doll into her pocket. She did not say goodbye to Annette or to Pell. She had nothing to say to them, and, to her great credit, she did not invent any. And in the cold blue hour before that morning was properly light, Vess let herself out of the black house and walked down to where the village ended and stepped onto the crooked road. The crooked road does not look like a road that means to kill you. That is its trick. It runs out of the village low and ordinary, between a hedgerow and a ditch, and for the first half-mile it is so plainly a road, packed earth, cart ruts, the prints of yesterday's dogs, that a child walking it would not at first know she had stepped onto one of the 13. Vess walked half a mile and did not know. She kept her father's coat pulled tight at the throat, and she counted her steps under her breath, because counting was something she did when she was afraid and would not show it. She was at 1,493 when she realized the hedgerow was gone. She stopped and turned in a slow circle, and on every side of her there was forest, old, thin, pale-trunked forest, where there should have been the green fields and the low stone walls of her own valley. No hedgerow, no ditch, no back of the village smoke against the morning. The road was still under her boots, going on ahead and going on behind, but the country on either side of it had changed while she was looking down at her own counting feet. She did not panic. The first useful thing her mother had told her, before the doll, before any of it, was, when something has stopped making sense, do not run. Vess had been 4 then. She had remembered. She took the doll out of her pocket. She broke a crumb of bread off the heel she carried, and she put it to the doll's 2-stitch mouth, and she said, very low, "The country is gone. What do I do?" And the doll, in the small voice it had, which I am not going to pretend to you was a real voice, and which Vess herself would not have called a voice exactly, but a sense in her hand of an answer arriving. The doll said, "Keep walking. The road is the only place that is still itself." Vess put the doll away. She picked up her counting again at 1,494, and she did not look at the forest again all morning, because to look hard at the crooked road's lie is to invite it to do worse, and that was the second useful thing the doll had ever told her. She walked all that day and into the next, and the road would not let her measure the distance. She would walk for what her legs said was an hour, and a milestone she had passed an hour before would, somehow, be 100 paces ahead of her again. She would stop to rest, and the place she sat down would be, when she stood up, turned in some small wrong way, the dead tree on the right side of the road now on the left, the road's bend reversed. The road did not loop her. That would have been kind. The road simply, patiently, declined to let her arrive anywhere on its own terms. It would let her arrive when the thing at the end of it was ready to receive her. That is the whole of the crooked road's cruelty, and it is enough. It does not kill you with monsters. It only takes from you the small, ordinary certainty that walking forward is a way of getting somewhere. And once that certainty is gone, there is very little of a child left to work with. Vess kept walking. She ate the last of her bread on what she thought was the second morning, but the light had not been honest with her, and it might have been the third. She drank from a clear, cold stream beside the road that had not been there an hour before, and she trusted it to be water because the doll, when asked, said it was, and the doll had not, ever, been wrong about a thing it had been asked. And then, on a turn that her counting did not predict, the road simply ended, and Vess was standing in front of the house that walks. I want to tell you what she saw, and I want to be flat about it, because the house, and this is the part the village had wrong, every village always has this part wrong, the house was not, at first sight, frightening. It was a small, dark, neatly built cottage in a clearing, with a steep, mossy roof and a low door, and one small window the color of old amber. There was a chimney, There was smoke. There was, in the air, the faint, warm smell of bread. It stood on two legs. The legs were thin and long, and the color of old bone. And they were tucked beneath the cottage the way a heron tucks its legs when it has settled, knees forward, knees back, an arrangement no living creature Vess had ever seen used, and which suggested, without ever stating, that the legs could, at any time, unfold. The cottage stood as still on them as a chair stands on its own legs, but it was a kind of stillness that knew it was a choice. Around the cottage, set at the 4 points of a small clearing, were 4 tall stakes, and on each stake was a human skull, and inside each skull a small, clean, yellow flame. The flames did not flicker. They sat in the eye sockets of the skulls the way water sits in a cup, perfectly still, perfectly even. 4 small yellow lights in 4 dead heads, lighting the clearing better than any morning would have done. There was no wind. The smoke from the chimney went straight up. Vess put her hand into her pocket and held the doll. She did not speak. She had decided, somewhere on the road, not to speak until spoken to. The cottage had its back to her. That was the next thing she understood. There was no door on the side of the cottage facing her. The window faced her. The window was the color of a closed eye, but there was no door, only a windowless wall where a door should have been. And Vess understood, standing in the clearing with the 4 still flames around her, that the house had turned its back on her, and that nothing was going to happen until it turned around. She did not know the words to make it turn. The village had not told her any words. The village had not expected her to need any. The village had expected her to die in the forest 2 days ago of cold or fear or the road's slow nudging. So Vess stood in the clearing and she thought, and the doll in her pocket sat quiet, because the doll, she was beginning to understand, did not speak unless asked. And after a long while of thinking, Vess took the doll out, and she fed it the very last crumb in her pocket, and she said, "It has its back to me. What do I say?" And the doll said, "The truth." Vess looked at the windowless wall. She felt very small in the clearing. She felt the 4 still flames on her back. Then she said, in a clear and not loud voice, the kind of voice you use to ask a polite question of an adult you are afraid of, "I have walked a long way, and I would like to come in. I am Vess. My mother was Inara. I do not have anyone to send in my place." The cottage was quiet for the length of a breath. Then, on its 2 pale legs, it stood up. It did not unfold and rise. It was standing, in the way a man stands who had been sitting on his heels and has decided to be on his feet. One motion, smooth, no warning. And the cottage on its 2 legs lifted itself fully clear of the moss and turned in place, slow and exact, like a key turning in a lock, until the windowless wall was behind it and a low black door was directly in front of Vess. And then the cottage settled, knees forward, knees back, and the door clicked once by itself, and it opened. Inside, in the warm yellow light, an old woman was waiting at a table, and she had been expecting someone, and she did not look surprised that Vess was the someone. I will tell you what the grandmother looked like, because Vess looked, and because looking carefully at the thing in front of her was the 3rd useful thing her mother had ever taught her. She was very old. Not in the storytelling way that old means a witch with a hooked nose and warts. In the real way that old means a thin, clean face with all the sharpness still in it, hands large at the knuckles, 2 grey braids gone almost white, a black wool dress without ornament, and pale eyes that had spent a great deal of time looking at things that did not look back. She was at a long wooden table. The table was set neatly for 2. There was a loaf of dark bread on a board. There was a pot of something with steam still moving above it. There were 2 clean wooden bowls and 2 clean wooden spoons. There were 2 cups. She did not stand when Vess came in. She did not smile. She looked at Vess for a long moment over the steam of the pot, and she said, in a voice that was not unkind and was not anything like kind, "You took longer than I'd allowed for. Sit down. Eat before you talk." Vess sat. She ate. She did not at any point take her hand out of the pocket with the doll. When Vess had eaten, and she ate plainly, neither greedily nor shy, because she was a child who had learned how to receive food without making a story of it, the grandmother set her own spoon down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at Vess. "Who sent you?" she said. It was not a question. It was a request that the answer be spoken. "My stepmother," Vess said. The grandmother nodded once. "To fetch fire. Because?" Vess thought about this. The honest answer and the polite answer were not the same answer. Vess had spent 5 years in a house where the difference mattered, and she had learned which one was worth saying. She said the honest one. "Because there were 3 of us, and she only meant the sum for 2. The grandmother looked at her steadily. Then the grandmother did something Vess had not seen anyone do in months. She laughed. It was a short, dry, surprised sound, the laugh of a person who has not expected to be told the truth and has, for a half-second, enjoyed it. "Well," the grandmother said, "that's plainer than I'm used to." She straightened the spoon on her plate, the way you might straighten a pen on a desk before beginning to write. "I'll give you your fire, Vess. You can earn it. 3 days of work in this house. You do what I set you. You do it properly. At the end of the 3rd day, if you are still in the house and still what you are, you go home with what you came for." Vess heard the trap door under that. Still what you are. She did not let the grandmother see her hear it. "And if I'm not?" she said, very evenly. The grandmother shrugged one shoulder. "Then you go home with what you've become instead." The first task was set that night, with the bowls still on the table and the fire in the hearth low and warm. The grandmother brought out from a shelf a wooden box about the size of a hat. She set it on the table in front of Vess and lifted the lid. Inside, mixed together in a single grey and black drift, were 2 kinds of grain, pale wheat and the small black seeds Vess had only ever seen used to flavour winter cakes. "Poppy," her mother would have said. There must have been 1,000 of each, all stirred together, all of them about the same size, none of them sortable by anything but the eye and a slow, careful hand. "By morning," the grandmother said, "the 2 are in 2 bowls. Not 1 grain wrong. If even 1 is wrong, I'll know." She did not say what would happen if Vess got even 1 wrong. She did not need to. She went to bed. The door of her room closed. There was no lock on it that Vess could hear. Vess had been listening for that the whole supper, and Vess understood that there was no lock because no lock was needed. The grandmother was not afraid of her. Vess sat at the table with the wooden box of mixed grain and counted what she had been given to do, the way she counted everything. She estimated by eye 1,500 wheat grains and 1,500 poppy seeds. Working as fast as a careful child could work, picking and placing each seed by the tips of her fingers, and she had small, careful fingers, Vess could perhaps sort 6 grains a minute. She did the arithmetic in her head. 3,000 grains divided by 6 a minute was 500 minutes. 8 hours and 20 minutes. There were 7 hours of darkness left. It was not enough. She did not let her face do anything. She took the doll out of her pocket. She broke a crumb of the dark bread off the loaf that was still on the table and put it to the doll's mouth, and she said, very softly, "Help me, please." The doll said, "Sleep. I'll do the box." Vess slept on the bench by the hearth, and whatever was in the doll, and whatever in turn the doll was a small grey scrap of, in this world I have walked 13 roads of, and do not pretend to understand, went out into the room, into the wooden box, and worked. When Vess woke, the grey light of morning was at the window, and on the table were 2 clean wooden bowls, and one of them held a small clean drift of pale wheat, and the other held a small clean drift of black seed, and the wooden box stood empty between them. The doll was back in her pocket. There were no crumbs on the table. The grandmother came out of her room as the first sun crossed the floor. She walked to the table. She looked down at the 2 bowls a long time. She picked up 1 wheat grain between thumb and forefinger and held it to the morning light. She put it back. She picked up 1 black seed. She put it back. She picked up another wheat grain. Then she set her hand flat on the table beside the bowls, and she looked at Vess. "Did you do this work?" she said. Vess understood that this was the trap. "No," she said. The grandmother looked at her a second longer. "Who then?" And Vess, who had learned the lesson her mother gave her with the doll, who had carried it the 5 long years of the household sum, who knew what a thing that helps you is worth only as long as it stays a secret. Vess looked her in the eye and said the second truest thing she could. "Something that helps me, that I am not going to tell you about." The grandmother held her eyes for what felt to Vess like a long time. Then the grandmother nodded, once, the same nod she had given when Vess told her plainly that her stepmother had wanted her dead. "Good answer," she said. "Better than the children who told me. Eat your breakfast. There's work today." And she set down a fresh loaf, and she sliced it, and she did not, for the rest of that morning, ask who or what had sorted the grain. The second day's task was the house itself. After breakfast, the grandmother stood and led Vess through every room of the cottage, and the cottage had more rooms than its small outside should have held, in the patient way that things at the end of the crooked road do not feel obliged to obey ordinary arithmetic. And at each doorway, the grandmother said, in a flat, practical voice, "Swept, scrubbed, bedding aired, ash cleared, water carried, brass polished, knives wiped, floor sanded." She named the work the way another woman might recite a shopping list. By dark, all of it. Vess looked into the rooms as they went. They were not individually large. There were, by her count, 7 of them. The labor was the kind of labor that, in her own house, the 4 of them together had needed a long Saturday to do. Vess thought, briefly, of the wheat and poppy, and was not afraid. The grandmother had read her, of course. At the last door, the grandmother turned and said, almost gently, "And you will do it yourself, Vess, not the thing that helps you." She looked steadily into Vess's face. "I am not a fool, child. I knew last night what you'd done. I let you have it because the first night a guest is owed 1 kindness in this house. There are no more. If anything but your own 2 hands does today's work, I'll see." Vess held the grandmother's eyes. "Yes," she said. "Good," said the grandmother. "I'll be in the garden if you need water from the well. The bucket is by the door. The rope is shorter than you think." She went out. The door closed. Vess took the doll out of her pocket and set it on the table, for the first time, in the light, where anyone walking in could have seen it. She fed it a crumb. She said, "I have to do this one myself. Stay where I can see you. Don't help unless I ask aloud." The doll said, in its small, knot voice, "Yes, Vess." And Vess worked, alone, the whole long day. She did not finish. That is the part of this tale you do not get told in the village versions. She did not finish. She had cleared 4 of the 7 rooms by the time the sun began to slope, and she was so far behind that even she, who did not give up easily, could see by the angle of her own shadow on the floor that she was not going to make it. She did not call the doll. She set down her cloth. She walked outside. She went and found the grandmother in the garden, kneeling between long rows of something Vess did not know the name of, and she stood at a polite distance, and she said, "I have done 4 rooms. I will not finish the 7. I want you to know that before dark, so I am not pretending later." The grandmother stopped weeding. She did not look up. She said, with no particular feeling in her voice, "And the thing that helps you?" "Watching from the table," Vess said. "I told it not to." The grandmother stood, slowly, with the small, careful effort an old woman uses to stand from a kneel. She brushed earth off her hands on her apron. She looked at Vess for a long, level moment. "Why did you not just have it finish?" she said. "I would not have caught you. I am a great many things, child, but a person who counts polishings is not one." "Because you said," Vess said. The grandmother's mouth made a small, flat shape that was not quite a smile, but was perhaps a relative of one. "Good answer," she said. "Better than the children who finished. Come in and eat." And that was the second day, and Vess did not, you understand, win the test by doing the work. She won it by refusing to cheat at it, even when cheating would have cost her nothing she could see, and the grandmother, who was 1,000 things but did not waste her interest, knew exactly what was rare about a child who would do that. The third day there was no task. There was no test. There was no list. The grandmother and Vess sat at the long table and ate breakfast in plain silence, and after the meal the grandmother said, "Today we talk. Sit." So Vess sat across the table from the grandmother, and the 4 still yellow flames on the 4 stakes outside the window kept their level light, and the grandmother began to ask Vess questions. "On the crooked road, walking out, what did you see first that was not a road?" Vess thought. "The forest. The hedgerow was gone, and there was forest." The grandmother nodded. "And second?" "A milestone I had already passed, ahead of me again." "And third?" "Water that wasn't there an hour before." The grandmother sat with her hands folded on the table. "And what did you do the 3 times?" Vess thought about this longer. "The first time, I asked the doll what to do." She did not stop herself. The secret had been kept long enough that she had room now to say a careful piece of it. The doll said, "Keep walking. The road is the only place that is still itself." The second time I did not look at the forest. The third time I drank the water. The grandmother nodded a 4th time. Then she said, in exactly the same voice, no warning, no shift, "And what is the doll?" Vess felt the room go careful around her. The yellow light in the window held. The flames on the stakes outside did not flicker. She knew the question. She had known it would come. She also knew, because she had grown up with her stepmother's sum and the rush drawing and the lamp moved off her hem. She also knew what people did when you handed them the explanation of the thing that helped you, in the false belief that having been kind to you, they would not use it against you. They used it against you. The lamp came away from the hem. The sum revised. Vess looked at the grandmother across the table. She thought of her mother's voice, 6 years old, the small, private voice of a woman with very little time left. "A thing that helps you is only yours for as long as it's secret." "I will not tell you," Vess said. The grandmother's pale eyes considered her. "Are you afraid I'll take it?" "Yes." "Are you sure I would?" "I am sure," Vess said, plainly, "that the people who have asked me for the answer to that question, the few times in my life it's been asked, have always taken what I gave them. So I am not going to give it. Not to you. Not even though I think you would not, perhaps, take it. I cannot afford to tell the difference, and I have been told that the not telling is the whole of how the thing keeps working." The grandmother sat quiet a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "Your mother told you that, didn't she?" Vess felt something hot in her face. She did not let it do anything. "Yes," she said. "A wise woman, then." "Yes." "And dead," the grandmother said, not unkindly, stating a fact she clearly already knew, the way she had known Vess was coming. "Most of them are. They tend not to outlast the houses they marry into." Vess did not answer. She did not need to. The grandmother set her hands flat on the table and pushed herself to standing. She walked across the room to a shelf Vess had not, in the 2 days, paid attention to, a low, dark shelf in the corner, and she lifted down from it a thing the size of a small lantern, and she set it on the table between them. It was a skull. Small, human or near it, polished and clean and pale, with the lower jaw bound to the upper by a single neat band of dark brass, and a brass handle fixed to the crown by an iron pin, and inside the empty sockets and the empty nose and the empty open arch of the mouth, a steady, level, yellow light, the same light as the 4 flames on the 4 stakes outside. "You came for fire," the grandmother said. "Here is fire. It will go where you go. It will not go out on the road. When you reach the place you mean to take it to, you will set it down where the cold hearth is, and you will step back, and you will not, Vess, you will not stand between the fire and the people you brought it home for." She put the brass handle in Vess's hand. The skull was lighter than Vess had expected. The light inside it was warm on her fingers. The flame did not move. "Do you know what the fire is going to do?" the grandmother said. Vess looked at the steady yellow inside the bone. She thought of her stepmother. She thought of Annette. She thought of Pell, who had said, "Like a little cat," kindly, smiling. "I think," Vess said. "I do." The grandmother nodded. "Good. I do not give fire to children who do not know what fire is for." She sat back down at her table. She picked up her spoon. "Eat your breakfast," she said. "Then go home." The crooked road on the way home was a different road. It did not fold the distance back on Vess. It did not move the milestones. It did not put a hedgerow that was not there. The crooked road has a use for visitors going one way, and it has, apparently, a different use, or no use, for visitors coming back. And Vess walked out of the clearing with the 4 flames still and yellow behind her, and she found, almost at once, that the road in front of her ran straight and even and ordinary all the way to the gap in the trees where her own valley began. It took her, by the count of her own legs, half a day. The skull lantern hung from her hand. The flame inside it did not move. She did not, the whole walk, take the doll out of her pocket. She did not need to. She came down off the crooked road at the boundary stone and crossed the boundary stone and walked up the lane between the dark houses of her village, and nobody saw her come. It was the cold hour before light, just as it had been when she left, 4 days ago, on what had been planned as her last morning. She let herself into her father's house. The house was dark. The hearth was as cold as she had left it. Her stepmother and the 2 stepsisters were a heap of bedding pulled together on the kitchen floor in front of the dead grate. They had given up sleeping in their separate beds the second night and slept all 3 of them by the cold hearth in the hope of holding what little warmth their bodies still had between them. They woke when Vess opened the door. They sat up. Annette's hair was disordered. Pell's eyes were wide and round. The stepmother, who had spent 4 days expecting to be told a passing trader had found her stepdaughter's body 2 miles down the crooked road, the stepmother saw Vess in the doorway in the cold blue light, with the polished skull lantern hanging at her side and the steady yellow eye fire inside it. And her own face did a thing that Vess had not, in 5 years, seen it do. It went, afraid. Vess did not enjoy the fear. I want to be plain about that. Vess was not, even then, not even fully then, a cruel child. She did not enjoy it. She looked at the 3 of them on the cold floor, the woman who had raised the rush, and the two girls who had moved the lamp off her hem and called her, smiling, a little cat. And she felt, mostly, a vast and final kind of tiredness. But the grandmother had told her plainly what to do, and the grandmother had been right about everything else. And Vess had learned in this last week to trust an instruction from an old woman who knew what she was doing. She walked across the room. She did not speak to any of them. She set the skull lantern down gently on the cold black stones of the dead hearth. She turned around. She walked without hurrying to the wall opposite, far away from the hearth, far away from the three of them, and she stood with her back to the wall the way the grandmother had said. The flame inside the skull, for the first time since Vess had been handed it, moved. It did not flicker. It did not flare. It did three things very deliberately. It brightened a fraction. It turned in the empty socket the way an eye turns when it picks a thing out of a crowd. And it found, with a small, unmistakable adjustment, the three faces by the hearth. I will not give you the rest of it in any detail. The village heard nothing. It happened without sound, and the village always said so afterwards, as if the silence were the worst part, and perhaps it was. By the time the sun came properly up, there was, on the kitchen floor, in the place the three of them had been huddled, a soft, fine drift of grey ash that the morning's first cool air had not yet had time to disturb. The bedding had not burned, their clothes had not burned, the wood of the floor had not so much as scorched. Only the three of them, and only what had been the three of them. The skull lantern was dark and quiet and on the cold hearth. Vess made breakfast. She had not eaten since the grandmother's table the morning before, and there was, in the larder, bread and butter and a little hard cheese. And Vess sat at the kitchen table with her back to the hearth and ate, slowly and properly, the way her mother had taught her, and she did not look at the floor. When she had finished, she washed the plate. She put the butter away. She swept the ash very carefully into a clean jar she had taken down from the shelf for the purpose, and she sealed the jar, and she set it on the top of the mantel above the cold hearth, between her mother's thimble and the comb with 2 teeth gone. 3 things before, 4 things now. And only then, when the kitchen was tidy, and the morning was full, and the village outside the window was beginning to stir, did Vess sit back down at her table and put her face in her hands and cry without making any sound at all. She cried for a long time. She did not, I'm told, cry for her stepmother, or for Annette, or for Pell, who were a clean jar on a clean mantle now and did not need crying over. She cried because the grandmother had been right about the fire and about Vess and about what Vess was going to do, and the grandmother had been right because Vess was, in some plain way, a child capable of being right about. And the doll in her pocket did not speak, because Vess had not asked it anything, and because the doll, after this morning, would not, ever again, need to. I knew Vess after. She kept the house. She was 11 years old, and the village had no machinery for taking a house off an 11-year-old who had a perfectly good claim to it, particularly when nobody in the village wanted to ask, in detail, what had become of the women who had lived in it before. The boundary priest, who was a decent man, kept a close eye on her. 2 of the kinder neighbors saw to it that she had what she needed. Vess accepted these kindnesses neatly and gave them back what she could. She grew up. She married, late, a quiet wheelwright from the next village over, and she did not have children, and she was, the people who knew her would tell you, a good person, in a way that had a careful margin around it. She kept the jar on the mantel until the day she died. She would not say what was in it. The wheelwright, after she was gone, did not open it, and buried it with her, which seems to me the right thing to have done. What she was, after the house that walks, was a person who knew what she could afford to keep secret, and what she could afford to do plainly, and what a debt to the dead is worth when it is properly settled, and these are not bad things to know. They are not warm things to know either. The grandmother had told her, and I think Vess always remembered it as the kindest thing the old woman ever said. I am not a person who counts polishings. It is a thing you say to a child you have decided is worth being honest with. So, here is the toll of this one. It is a small one, and you can carry it. If a person who runs the house tells you that your share is being measured against the other's shares, and that the sum does not balance, and that the fair thing, the only sensible thing, is for you to be the one to go out and fetch some impossible thing from the dark.
Go. Go before they say it twice. Go before you can be talked out of going. The crooked road is the crooked road, and you may not come back. But a child kept in a house that has decided to be rid of her does not come back either, only slower. And take the thing your mother gave you in your pocket, and do not show it to anybody, ever, on the road or off it. And remember, if the old woman at the end of the road asks you the question, and she will ask in some form sooner or later, remember that the only correct answer in the world is the one you have already been told. You will not tell her. That is the answer. Say it, plainly, the way Vess said it. I will not tell you. And let her decide what to do with a child who knows how to say no to her. Most of the time, traveler, she will give you the fire. She is, when you understand her, the same kind of person who would not waste her interest counting polishings. She is. I have met her on a road twice, and I have not, either time, told her about my doll.